Let's make apple cider, because in this economy and the price of a pint going for upwards of £8 in some pubs, everyone should be making their own alcohol at home. And apple cider is a really straightforward entry point for people who have never made alcohol before, because it only requires 2 ingredients. It only requires apple juice and yeast, and very basic equipment like a fermenting jar, an airlock, and a bung. And that's it. So when it comes to apple juice, we want one that's got a little amount of ingredients as possible. And I'm not meaning that like those grifters that walk through supermarkets telling you that aspartame is going to kill you. The reason's practical, not fear-mongering. And the reason is that a lot of apple juice contains preservatives like sodium benzoate and potassium sorbate, which they're put in there quite literally to make it shelf stable and stop yeast particles from fermenting the sugar, which is exactly what we're wanting to do with this. So the apple juice that I've got here is just apple juice and added vitamin C. That might come in on yours as ascorbic acid, but it's just vitamin C, and it's only there to preserve the color. Because like if you took a bite out of an apple and then left it out, 10 minutes later it's going to be brown. Apple juice is going to do the exact same and start to brown, so the vitamin C is added in just to maintain the colour. Now for yeast, I'm going with 71B, but any yeast will work. Yes, even bread yeast. Now people are going to get ready to comment, but Michael, if you're making alcohol, you should be using a yeast designed for alcohol. But the thing is, apple cider only gets up to about 5 to 7% alcohol typically, and any yeast strain will be able to handle that. And yes, even bread yeast. So if that's what you've got, use it. So let's get started. The first step when making alcohol is sanitization. It doesn't matter what the alcohol is, that's what we want to do. If your equipment even so much as looks at your product, you want it sanitized. Now sanitization is not just using soap and water, although you do need to do that. It's a second step after that where it kills all the yeast and bacteria that's left over. Now I like something like Star San, and the simple reason being is it's no rinse solution. So basically what that means is once you've used it, you don't need to rinse it. And then, so if you've got bubbles like here, then that's completely fine. You don't need to rinse those out. Now, actual sanitizing is really straightforward. All you need to do is, first off, wash your equipment with soap and water, and then leave it in your sanitizing solution for a couple minutes, and then just let it drip dry. Now, something some people might ask is, can I ferment in the vessels themselves? And you can. I wouldn't recommend it, just simply because one of the important parts of this is that we want to aerate the apple juice before we put the yeast in, the simple thing that then helps promote a healthy yeast colony. Right, so just to make sure it's properly aerated, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the lid on and I'm just going to shake it a bit just to get it aerated. Now the reason that I've left this little bit of room here is when the yeast starts fermenting, it's going to start causing bubbles. And then if you've overfilled this, then the bubbles are going to overspill into the airlock, which can cause some issues on its own. So I like to leave a little bit, maybe about an inch of room at the top, just to be sure. So a packet like this size here will make about 5 gallons, so 5 of these. But I don't tend to worry that too much about that. I'll typically use about half a packet in a gallon brew. But even if you used a full packet, it's not going to cause overpitching or anything, so you don't need to worry about it. Some people will disagree with that, but I've made plenty of recipes on this channel that I've pitched an entire packet in and it's never had any issues. So I'm just going to open this and then just dump in about half a packet. Now what you can do is just fold this over, put some tape on it, and then leave it in the fridge because then it'll last a really long time. So then same again, I'm going to give this a bit of a shake. I'm not going to do it even remotely vigorously. I'm just doing it just because if you do it really vigorously, then the yeast might stick to the edges of the bowl or the vessel, and then won't end up doing their job. So next, what I want to do is I want to take a gravity reading. Now this is, again, this is optional, you don't need to do this, but this will tell you how much sugar is available in your brew and gives you an estimated ABV based off roughly what it suspects it will be if all the sugar gets converted into alcohol. So what you need here is one of these hydrometers. And all it is you'll just drop it in, and then it'll measure where the specific gravity of it is, what the density of the liquid is. And then, as I said, it will give you an estimated ABV. Now, something some people ask is, do I need to do this before or after the yeast gets added in? And it doesn't matter necessarily, as long as if you're doing it after the yeast is in, you're doing it quite quickly after you've done it, before the yeast really starts converting the sugar into alcohol. Because if you do it like 28, 48 hours later, then some of the sugar is going to start getting converted, so the number it gives you is effectively useless. But if you do it within about 10 minutes after you've put the yeast in, it should not matter. Now, ciders typically are going to come between 1.050 and 1.055, and this one right here is the exact same. It's roughly about 1.052. So according to my ABV calculator, it should, if all the sugar converts into alcohol, this should be about 6.83%, which is roughly about what I expected. Now, what we can do, because I sanitized my hydrometer and my cylinder, I can just dump that back in. But this is a very common way for people to screw up, is if they haven't sanitized it and then they check their hydrometer and then they put it back in, because that's introducing bacteria that could then sour your brew. So finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my lid on, and then we're going to add an airlock, which is this thing right here. Just going to add that in. And essentially all this does is it allows gas to escape, but we put fluid in there so that then oxygen can't get in. Now, I always use my sanitizing solution. I just leave some like this in a little measuring container and put that in, and then put a top over it. And now what that's going to do is that's going to allow the gas to escape, because when yeast eat sugar, it converts it into alcohol and CO2. So that helps the CO2 release without letting anything get in the liquid. And so yeah, I'll come back once this starts fermenting. So it's been about a day since I started fermenting this cider, and fermentation actually started within a couple hours, but I just wanted to leave it for about a day just to let it get going and then be in a full fermentation cycle. So something that I forgot to film yesterday is that I like to put some notes on the jar. So what it is, when it started fermenting, and then it started specific gravity. That's more just so for future me, because fermentation of some things can take over a month, so it's quite easy to forget what it was. As you can see, there are bubbles in the airlock, as well as bubbles rising up through the liquid. And that is the telltale sign that you've got active fermentation happening. Now, something you might notice when you get to about a day of it starting to ferment is quite an unpleasant sulfurous smell, almost like rotten egg. That's completely normal. I've always had that happen with cider, and that is simply just because apples contain sulfur. It's nothing to worry about. It's not gone off or anything. It's completely normal. It's just a byproduct of fermenting apple juice. And it should clear itself out within probably about a week or so, I would say. That's how it's always been for me. Now, what I like to do now is give it a little bit of a shake, like this. Kind of all that does is it just makes sure everything gets back into the liquid, because sometimes if you've got a very rapid fermentation, it can push some of the yeast out of the liquid, and then if the yeast is not in the liquid, it's not doing its job. And another thing it does is it just helps get some of the CO2 out, because it can get quite gassy, and so it just helps with that process. And something else to note is if you wait a couple of days to swirl it, there might be a layer of dead yeast at the bottom. That's what the white will be at the bottom. And that will just reintroduce it back into the liquid, but it'll quickly just fall back out again. It's not anything to be worried about. Now I'll just let this do its thing back in the closet, and I'll come back to you probably in about a week or 10 days, because something at this ABV really doesn't take that long to ferment at all. So I'll be back when it does. Right then, so it's been about a week and bubbling stopped, which means one or two things. Cider's done, or I've killed it. So let's figure out which one it is. I mean, it smells like cider, which is a good start. It could smell a lot worse. And as I said earlier, that sulfury smell will eventually ease out after about a week or so. So it's time to measure the specific gravity to see if it's done. So it's coming in at about 1.001, which essentially means it's done. It also means it's going to be a bit of a drier cider, which is what I like. I prefer a drier cider because I like to feel like I'm drinking cider and not a Snapple apple juice. But if you like your cider sweeter, we'll get on later on how that you can make it sweeter. But now we are going to rack it. So again, because I have sanitized my hydrometer and my tube, I can just pour that right back in, and now we'll get to racking it. Now, before we rack it, something that's very important is that cider is typically going to have a bit more gas than mead. The reason for that is that mead typically ages over months and sometimes even years, so it's got more of a time to let that gas escape through the airlock. The cider is typically done within a week or two, and so a lot of it is still left within the jar, and so we need to get rid of that before we rack it. How long you stir it is up to you. Ideally, you want to just keep doing it until you stop seeing bubbles being released from the liquid. But depending on your apple juice, that could take hours, and I don't have that type of commitment. So I'm just probably going to stir it for a couple of minutes until the bubbling slows down. Number two that you have to keep in mind is that after your fermentation is done, like we see here, if you're stirring it in the primary vessel, you're reintroducing the dead yeast and particles at the bottom of the jar back into it, so you have to wait for that to settle back out before you can rack it. And the reason I'm doing it in here instead of my other vessel is because my little vessel is a little bit harder to stir out because of the size of the opening. So we're just going to keep stirring this. Now, as you're stirring this, you're going to see bubbles coming up through the liquid, and that is just your CO2. And so what we're going to do is we're going to keep going on and keep stirring. What we're going to do is we're going to keep stirring until that slows down or it stops, or you get bored. All of them are valid endpoints. Basically, what you want to do is just want to agitate it. So alternate how fast you're stirring, alternate the direction you're stirring. We're just trying to get the bubble as much of the carbonation out as possible, because this is not nice carbonation. We'll get into nice carbonation later if you want your cider to be carbonated. Another interesting way that I've seen people use is using a drill and a long drill bit and using that to quickly release the carbonation. That's another valid way to do it. I don't have that ability to do that because I don't have a drill. So now we rack it. So that is effectively just a fancy way to say we are taking the liquid out of here and moving it into this jar here and leaving this dead yeast behind at the bottom of the brew. That's just dead yeast, dead particles, the clay bentonite if you've put that in. And the reason is that you don't want that in your final drink. You want to leave that behind because it's kind of gross and nasty and it can cause off flavors. And some people are very precious about racking. I'm not. I'm just send it. If you get it from this jar to this jar without spilling it, you've done grand. So what we're going to do, we're going to open this. We're going to put this side in here. And then the bottom of the hose in here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start pumping it. And then once you get enough force in there, it's going to start doing this all by itself. Also, the bubbles in here are from the Star San, and because Star San's a no-rinse solution, it's not an issue. That's completely fine. And so it's just going to do its thing to move this in. And you want to do it with a siphon because you don't want the brew to have contact with oxygen. So you don't want to just pour this into here. You want to have it with as little amount of contact with the oxygen as possible. And once you're done, it's going to look like this. It's just the exact same cloudy mixture that was in there, just without the yeast at the bottom. You're always going to have a little bit of loss at the bottom, just the stuff that had contact with the dead yeast. I just call that the angel's share and just accept that loss. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to pop an airlock on here, put it back in the closet for about another week or so until it starts clearing up, and then it will eventually look like clear cider and not just cloudy apple juice, but don't worry about that. That's completely normal. You've not messed anything up. Another way that you could speed this up is to use clay bentonite, which how you do that is you put some in some water to make a paste and then drop that in. That helps clear up home brews really quickly. I just didn't want to get another dish dirty, so I didn't bother. I'm just going to let this naturally clear out on its own, because with enough time, the suspended particles in here will eventually drop out and then clear up, and then it will resemble something that looks actually drinkable. So for now, we're just going to put this in here like so. That's it for now. The cider's going back in the closet to think about what it's done. And then when it's ready and when it's cleared up, we'll come back to either bottle it or drink it straight from the jar. I really haven't decided yet. A couple of weeks now that I've just let this settle, and it's gotten very clear. It actually cleared up within about 5 days, but I was busy and just couldn't record. But aging's never really a bad thing when it comes to cider. In fact, it's a very good thing because young cider usually doesn't taste too good. So this is done. We've made alcohol, we've let it clear up, and so if you wanted to drink it like this, you could. I personally prefer my cider to be fizzy, so that's what I'm going to do, but I will also taste it flat as well, just to kind of see what it tastes like. So first up, what we need to do is we need to bottle it. So what we're going to do is you need bottles. Take a guess at what I was drinking to get empty bottles. You need bottles, you need bottle caps, and you need sugar. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to add some sugar into the bottle, then put the cider in, and then the yeast that's still alive in here will then eat the sugar, and because it won't be able to escape, that's how it will fizz up. It's essentially doing another version of fermenting, just instead of having an airlock to let the gas out, we're trapping the gas in. So what I've done is I've just put about half a teaspoon of sugar into each of these bottles. And then, yeah, we'll just fill it up with the cider, pop some bottle caps on and let it ferment for another couple of weeks. Okay, so we actually ended up with 8 1/3 bottles or so. So what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to bottle that one, I'll just use that one for tasting. And then we'll put a bottle cap on each of them and just let them sit for another 2 weeks or so to let them ferment the sugar that was added. So something I'll do when I bottle beer or cider like this is I will tip it like that for a couple seconds and then bring it back. That's for 2 reasons. Number one, I make sure the bottle cap is actually sealed it. And number two, it gets the sugar off the bottom into the liquid. So that's why if you see me go like that, that's why. So there we go. 8 1/3 bottles. I probably could have got a full ninth one out of the fermenter, but I agitated the yeast and it had gone back into the bottom of the liquid at the bottom of the fermenter, so I didn't want to deal with that because I got these nice and clear. So yeah, these 8 are going to go back into the closet, let them just sit there for another couple of weeks, and then we will taste test them. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to taste test that one there. Okay, so let's give this one a test. First off, I'm very impressed about how clear I got these. And that was that about a month or so? I'm kind of impressed. First off, it smells like cider. This fermented to under 1, I think. Honestly, I should have put a note, but I forgot. So it's going to be very dry anyway. If you wanted it sweeter, you could add additional sweetness for it. I quite like my cider dry. That's not bad at all. For a young cider, that's very drinkable. Young ciders can be quite not great. Cider is one of these things that it very much gets better with age. But for a cider that's about a month old, that's kind of impressive given that it came from bottom of the barrel apple juice from Asda. That's very drinkable. And another thing about young ciders, you can get quite a not a great smell off of it. It can smell kind of off. And that's just being young. That'll age out as it gets older. But I'm not getting any of the harsh, disgusting smells on it. It's very nice. And the flavor's just, it's very mild. But again, it came from a very cheap apple juice from Asda. If I'd got a higher quality one, or if I'd used real apples, that also would have made it better. But it's not bad. For a whole thing that cost me about £4 or something, it's very good. I'm going to go for another. But yeah, no, I'm very impressed about this. But for now, I'll let the other ones sit in the closet, and then in a couple of weeks we'll come back and do a taste test of the fizzy one. So be sure to be here for that. Okay, so it has been a couple of weeks since I bottled and let the cider ferment to fizz up. So let's give it a try now. I've only left it in the fridge for a couple of hours, so it's not super cold. But I hope it's fizzed up, which there wasn't a whole lot there. I probably should have put more sugar in than I did, but I wasn't too sure. I mean, let's give it a taste. Yeah, it's very subtle. It has got a bit of a fizz, but not as much as I would like. I probably should have doubled up on the sugar I put in, but that's a skill issue on my part. But yeah, if you want to fizz up your cider, that's what you do. Sugar into the bottle, put the cider in, and just leave it for a couple of weeks to ferment the additional sugar. And then you've got fizzy cider, or lack of fizzy cider. Double up, put at least a tablespoon of sugar in instead of half a tablespoon like I did, and it'll be way better than this is.